He stopped answering my calls the moment I asked for a refund. My name is Susan. I'm 70 years old, and I live in a quiet neighborhood just outside of Sarasota, Florida. This is the story of how a contractor took my money, left my bathroom half-finished, and then vanished. Until I used a tool I never thought I'd need, the chargeback. I've always tried to handle things the right way. I pay my bills on time, keep every receipt, and trust that if I do my part, others will do theirs. When my bathroom started leaking, I knew it was time for a remodel. I did my research, got 3 estimates, and chose a contractor who seemed honest and professional. His name was Greg. He had a nice website, a local address, and even a few glowing reviews from neighbors. We signed a contract, and I paid the first installment, $4,500 on my credit card, just like I do for most big purchases. Greg promised the job would be done in 2 weeks, but after the first few days, the work slowed to a crawl. Then one morning he just stopped showing up. No calls, no texts, no explanation. My bathroom was a mess. Tiles stacked in the hallway, pipes exposed, dust everywhere. I called, I emailed, I even drove by his office. Nothing. That's when I remembered something my daughter once told me. If you pay by credit card, you have options. I didn't know it then, but that advice would become my lifeline. This is how I used the chargeback play to get my money back, and what I learned along the way. The trouble started small, as it so often does. When Greg first came to look at my bathroom, he seemed like a breath of fresh air compared to the other contractors I'd met. He was polite, listened to my concerns, and even took off his shoes before stepping onto my old tile floor. He walked me through his plan, explained the timeline, and gave me a detailed estimate. I felt comfortable with him. Maybe too comfortable, in hindsight. We signed the contract at my kitchen table. I paid the first installment, $4,500 on my credit card. Greg assured me that using a card was fine, and even joked, "It's safer for both of us." I remember feeling a little proud of myself for being so organized. I kept the contract, the receipt, and every email in a folder labeled Bathroom Remodel. I thought I was prepared for anything. The first week went well enough. Greg and his crew showed up on time, covered the floors, and started tearing out the old tub and tile. The house was noisy and dusty, but I didn't mind. I made coffee for the crew, and even baked a batch of muffins one morning. Greg thanked me, saying, "Not every client is this thoughtful." I felt good about my choice. But by the second week, things started to slip. The crew was late, sometimes not showing up at all. Greg blamed it on a supplier delay, then on a sick worker, then on a family emergency. Each excuse sounded reasonable, but the work kept stalling. The new tub sat in the hallway, still in its box. The old vanity was gone, but nothing had replaced it. My bathroom was a construction zone, and I was starting to lose patience. I called Greg, and he promised to get things back on track. He sent a worker to install some drywall, but then another delay popped up. Days turned into a week, then 2. I started to worry. I called Greg again, but this time he didn't answer. I left a message, then another. I sent an email, but got no reply. I tried texting, but my messages went unread. By the end of the 3rd week, I was frustrated and anxious. My bathroom was unusable, and I was living out of a suitcase in my own home, using the guest bathroom down the hall. I called Greg's office, but the number went straight to voicemail. I drove by the address on his business card, but the office was dark and locked. I started to feel foolish. How could I have let this happen? I talked to my daughter who lives up in Atlanta. She listened patiently as I vented my worries. "Mom, you paid with your credit card, right?" she asked. I nodded. "Then you might be able to dispute the charge. It's called a chargeback. Credit cards have protections for situations like this." I'd heard of chargebacks before, but I'd never used one. I always thought they were for online scams or fraudulent purchases, not for something as complicated as a home renovation. Still, I was desperate. I pulled out my credit card statement, found the charge, and called the customer service number on the back of the card. The woman who answered was kind and patient. She listened as I explained the situation, then asked a series of questions. Had I signed a contract? Did I have proof of payment? Had the work been completed? I answered honestly, describing the half-finished bathroom and the contractor who'd vanished. She told me I could file a dispute, but I'd need to provide documentation, copies of the contract, receipts, emails, and photos of the unfinished work. I hung up and got to work. I gathered every scrap of paperwork, every email, every text message. I took photos of the bathroom, exposed pipes, missing tiles, the tub still in its box. I wrote a detailed timeline, listing every promise Greg had made and every deadline he'd missed. I even printed out my call log, showing all the unanswered calls and messages. Filing the dispute was easier than I expected. I uploaded everything to the credit card company's website, wrote a short letter explaining what had happened, and hit submit. I felt a mix of relief and anxiety. Would they believe me? Would I get my money back? I didn't know, but at least I was doing something. The next few days were a blur of waiting and worrying. I checked my email constantly, hoping for an update. I called the credit card company twice, just to make sure they'd received my claim. Each time they assured me it was being reviewed. It can take a few weeks, the representative said. We'll contact the merchant and give them a chance to respond. I tried to stay busy, gardening, reading, calling friends. But the unfinished bathroom was a constant reminder of what had gone wrong. I started to doubt myself. Had I missed something in the contract? Was there a loophole Greg could use to keep my money? I reread every line, searching for anything that might trip me up. The contract was clear. Payment for work completed, not for promises. One morning, I got a letter from the credit card company. My heart pounded as I opened it. It was an acknowledgement of my dispute, with a case number and a list of next steps. They needed a signed affidavit, confirming that the work was incomplete, and that I hadn't received what I paid for. I filled it out, made copies, and mailed everything back the same day. The waiting was the hardest part. Every day felt like a week. I kept busy, but the worry was always there, humming in the background. I reminded myself that I'd done everything right, kept records, followed the rules, and asked for help when I needed it. Now, I just had to wait and hope for the best. The days after I filed the chargeback felt like a strange kind of limbo. I'd taken action, but now everything was out of my hands. I kept replaying the whole ordeal in my mind. Every conversation with Greg, every promise he'd made, every time I'd convinced myself to be patient just a little longer. Now, all I could do was wait and hope that the system would work in my favor. I tried to keep my spirits up. My daughter called every evening to check in, always ending the conversation with, "Hang in there, Mom. You did the right thing." I wanted to believe her, but I couldn't help feeling anxious. I'd never disputed a charge before, and I worried that the credit card company might side with Greg, or that I'd missed some crucial detail in my paperwork. A week after I submitted my claim, I got an email from the credit card company. They had temporarily credited the $4,500 back to my account while they investigated. It was a relief to see my balance drop, but I knew it wasn't over yet. The letter explained that they would contact the merchant, Greg in this case, and give him a chance to respond. If he could prove that the work was completed as agreed, the charge would stand. If not, the credit would become permanent. I wondered what Greg would say. Would he try to claim the job was finished? Would he produce fake photos or forged documents? I doubted it. He hadn't responded to any of my calls or emails, and I suspected he'd ignore the credit card company too. Still, I worried. I'd heard stories of contractors who fought back, dragging out disputes for months. To keep myself busy, I started documenting everything even more carefully. I took new photos of the bathroom every few days, showing that nothing had changed. I wrote down every attempt I made to contact Greg, every call, every text, every email. I even kept a little journal, recording how the unfinished bathroom was affecting my daily life. Having to use the guest bathroom, the inconvenience of living with construction dust, the stress of not knowing when or if the job would ever be finished. I also started talking to my neighbors. I was embarrassed at first, but I needed to know if anyone else had dealt with Greg. To my surprise, 2 people on my street recognized his name. One had hired him for a small repair and said he'd finished the job, but it took much longer than promised. The other had gotten an estimate but decided not to hire him after he asked for a large deposit up front. "He seemed nice, but something felt off," she said. I realized I wasn't alone. That helped a little. I posted in a local Facebook group for homeowners, describing what had happened. Careful not to name Greg directly, but warning others to check references and never pay too much up front. The responses poured in, stories of missed deadlines, shoddy work, and contractors who disappeared with deposits. Some people offered advice, others just shared their own frustrations. It was comforting to know I wasn't the only one, but it was also infuriating. How could this keep happening? One woman messaged me privately and told me about her own experience. She'd lost $3,000 to a different contractor, but had managed to get most of it back through a chargeback. "It takes time," she wrote, "but don't give up. Keep calling, keep following up. The credit card company will pay if you have the paperwork." Her encouragement gave me the push I needed to keep going. A few days later, I got a letter from the credit card company. They needed more information, a copy of the contract, proof of payment, and a written statement describing the situation. I gathered everything, scanned the contract, printed out my credit card statement, and wrote a detailed letter explaining what had happened. I included photos of the unfinished bathroom, the timeline of events, and copies of every email and text message I'd sent to Greg. I mailed the packet the next day, double-checking the address 3 times before dropping it in the mailbox. The waiting continued. I tried to stay patient, reminding myself that I'd done everything I could. My daughter kept me company, calling every day to check in. "You're doing great, Mom," she said. "Just keep documenting everything. The more evidence you have, the better." One morning, about 3 weeks after I filed the dispute, I got a call from the credit card company. The representative was polite and professional. She asked a few questions. Had I received any materials? Had anyone started work since I filed the claim? Had Greg contacted me at all? I answered honestly, describing the half-finished bathroom and the silence from Greg. She thanked me for my time and said they'd be making a decision soon. I hung up the phone and let out a long breath. For the first time since Greg disappeared, I felt like I might actually get my money back. I just had to wait a little longer. During those weeks, I learned a lot about patience and about the power of persistence. I realized that the chargeback process wasn't just about paperwork. It was about standing up for myself, refusing to let someone take advantage of me, and trusting that the system would work if I gave it the chance. I also learned how important it was to talk openly about these experiences. For too long, I'd been embarrassed, afraid people would think I was foolish or naive. But the more I shared, the more I heard from others who'd been through the same thing. We all make mistakes, but we don't have to make them alone. As the days passed, I kept adding to my folder every letter, every email, every note from the credit card company. I wanted to be ready for anything. I even started a checklist for myself. Keep records, take photos, follow up, don't give up. It became my mantra. And then, one morning, I got the call I'd been waiting for. The call came on a Tuesday morning, just as I was pouring my second cup of coffee. I almost didn't answer, thinking it was another telemarketer, but something told me to pick up. The woman on the other end introduced herself as a supervisor from the credit card company's dispute department. Her voice was calm and businesslike, but I could hear a hint of warmth as she explained why she was calling. "Mrs. Evans, I wanted to let you know that we've completed our investigation into your dispute with Greg's home renovations. Based on the documentation you provided and the lack of response from the merchant, we're ruling in your favor. The $4,500 charge will be permanently credited to your account." For a moment, I was speechless. I'd been bracing myself for more questions, more paperwork, maybe even a denial. Instead, it was over, just like that. I thanked her, my voice trembling a little, and she congratulated me for being so thorough with my records. "Most people don't keep such good documentation," she said. "It made all the difference." After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table and let the relief wash over me. I'd gotten my money back. Not through threats or lawyers, but by following the process, keeping good records, and refusing to give up. I texted my daughter right away, and she called me back within minutes, her voice full of pride. "I knew you could do it, Mom. You didn't let him get away with it." But even as I celebrated, I couldn't help thinking about all the people who might not know about the chargeback process, who might give up after being ghosted by a contractor. I decided then and there that I would share my story, not just with my family, but with anyone who would listen. If I could help even one person avoid what I went through, it would be worth it. That afternoon, I took photos of the unfinished bathroom and wrote a post for our neighborhood Facebook group. I explained what had happened, how I'd paid by credit card, and how the chargeback process had saved me. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of comments, private messages, and even a few phone calls from people who wanted advice or just needed to vent. I realized that contractor troubles weren't just my problem. They were everyone's problem, and the more we talked about them, the less power those bad actors had. A few days later, I received a letter from the credit card company confirming the refund. I tucked it into my bathroom remodel folder, right alongside the contract, the photos, and every email I'd sent. It felt like a badge of honor, a reminder that I'd stood up for myself and won. But the bathroom was still a mess, and I knew I had to figure out what to do next. I started calling other contractors, this time asking even more questions and insisting on references I could actually speak to. I made it clear that I would only pay for work as it was completed, and that I would be keeping detailed records every step of the way. Some contractors seemed put off by my caution, but the good ones understood. "You'd be surprised how many people get burned," one told me. "You did the right thing." Eventually, I found a small family-owned company that came highly recommended by several neighbors. The owner, a woman named Maria, came out to look at the bathroom herself. She listened to my story, nodded sympathetically, and walked me through her process. "We don't ask for big deposits," she said. "We get paid when the work is done, and you're happy." It was exactly what I needed to hear. Maria's crew started work the following week. They showed up on time, cleaned up every day, and finished the job in less than 2 weeks. The new bathroom was everything I'd hoped for. Bright, clean, and functional. I sent photos to my daughter, who replied, "Now that's how it's supposed to be." Looking back, I realized that the real victory wasn't just getting my money back. It was learning to trust myself, to ask questions, and to insist on what was fair. I'd always thought of myself as polite, maybe even a little too trusting. But this experience taught me that standing up for yourself isn't rude. It's necessary. I also realized how important it was to talk openly about these experiences. For too long, I'd been embarrassed, afraid people would think I was foolish or naive. But the more I shared, the more I heard from others who'd been through the same thing. We all make mistakes, but we don't have to make them alone. As the weeks went by, I found myself becoming a bit of a resource for friends and neighbors. People would stop me on my morning walks, asking for advice or just wanting to share their own renovation stories. I listened, offered what help I could, and always reminded them, if you pay by credit card, keep every record, and don't be afraid to use the chargeback if you need to. One evening, as I was putting away towels in my new bathroom, my granddaughter came to visit. She's only 12, but she's already wise beyond her years. She watched as I closed the cabinet door and saw the folder labeled, Bathroom Remodel. "What's that for, Grandma?" she asked. I smiled and handed her the folder. "These are lessons I learned the hard way. Maybe one day you'll have a story to add." She grinned, her fingers tracing the words. "I want to be brave like you." Her words stayed with me long after she'd gone home. I realized that the real legacy I wanted to leave wasn't just a beautiful bathroom or a folder full of documents. It was the courage to speak up, to ask questions, to demand respect. It was the knowledge that we are never too old, too polite, or too alone to fight for what's right. After the dust settled and my bathroom was finally finished, I found myself thinking less about the tiles and fixtures and more about the journey it took to get there. What started as a simple remodel had turned into a lesson in standing up for myself, and a reminder that even when things go wrong, there are ways to make them right. The first lesson was simple, but it took this whole ordeal to really drive it home. Never pay a large deposit up front. I'd always thought that was just common sense, but it's easy to forget when you're excited about a project and the contractor seems trustworthy. Now I know better. A reputable contractor will never ask for more than a modest deposit, and if they do, it's a sign to walk away. The second lesson was about paperwork. Keep everything. Every text, every email, every receipt. I can't count the number of times I had to dig through my files to find a date or a document. If I hadn't kept such careful records, I doubt the credit card company would have approved my chargeback so quickly. It's not about being paranoid. It's about being prepared. I started telling my friends and neighbors, if it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. The third lesson was about the power of persistence. There were so many moments when I wanted to give up, when the waiting felt endless, when the doubts crept in, when I wondered if it was all worth it. But every time I felt like quitting, I remembered my daughter's voice on the phone, telling me to hang in there. I remembered the other homeowners who'd shared their stories with me, who'd fought back and won. I realized that sometimes the only thing standing between you and justice is the willingness to keep going, even when it's hard. I also learned about the importance of community. Before all this happened, I'd never really thought of myself as someone who needed help. I was used to handling things on my own, solving problems quietly and moving on. But when I started talking to my neighbors, when I posted in that Facebook group, I discovered a whole network of people who'd been through the same thing. We shared advice, offered encouragement, and celebrated each other's victories. It made me realize that we're all stronger when we stand together. With all these lessons in mind, I decided to do something I'd never done before. I wrote a letter to the editor of our local newspaper. I described what had happened, how I'd filed a chargeback, and how important it was to keep good records. I ended the letter with a simple message. If it happened to me, it can happen to anyone. Don't be afraid to stand up for yourself. To my surprise, the paper published it the following week. I got phone calls and emails from people all over town, some sharing their own stories, others just wanting to say thank you. I also started a little Homeowner's Survival Guide binder, just like I'd seen other people do online. I filled it with checklists, sample contracts, and a step-by-step guide to filing a chargeback. I made extra copies and handed them out at our neighborhood association meeting. People were grateful, and a few even told me they'd already started keeping better records because of my story. One afternoon, my neighbor Linda stopped by with a plate of cookies and a stack of paperwork. "Susan, can you help me look over this contract?" she asked. "After what happened to you, I want to make sure I'm not missing anything." We sat at my kitchen table, reading every line, highlighting important clauses, and making a list of questions for her contractor. It felt good to be able to help, to turn my experience into something positive. My daughter, too, became more cautious. She called me before hiring a plumber to fix her water heater, asking what questions to ask and what to look for in the contract. I sent her a copy of my checklist and reminded her, if anything feels off, trust your gut. She laughed and said, I guess the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. As the weeks went by, I found myself becoming a bit of a resource for friends and neighbors. People would stop me on my morning walks, asking for advice or just wanting to share their own contractor horror stories. I listened, offered what help I could, and always reminded them to pay by credit card if possible. Keep every record, and never be afraid to use the chargeback if they needed to. I also realized how important it was to talk openly about these experiences. For too long, I'd been embarrassed, afraid people would think I was foolish or naive. But the more I shared, the more I heard from others who'd been through the same thing. We all make mistakes, but we don't have to make them alone. One evening, as I was updating my homeowner's survival guide, my granddaughter came to visit. She's only 12, but she's already curious about everything. She watched as I sorted through my binder, her eyes wide. What's all this for, Grandma? She asked. I smiled and handed her a page. These are stories and tips from people who learned to stand up for themselves. Maybe one day you'll have a story to add. She grinned, her fingers tracing the words. I want to be brave like you. Her words stayed with me long after she'd gone home. I realized that the real legacy I wanted to leave wasn't just a beautiful bathroom or a list of rules. It was the courage to speak up, to ask questions, to demand respect. It was the knowledge that we are never too old, too polite, or too alone to fight for what's right. As the months passed and life returned to its gentle routines, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. The bathroom, once a source of stress and sleepless nights, had become a place of comfort and pride again. Every time I turned on the faucet or hung a fresh towel, I remembered not just the mess and the waiting, but the strength it took to see it through. I realized that what mattered most wasn't the color of the tiles or the style of the fixtures. It was the lesson that I could stand up for myself, even when it felt uncomfortable. I thought about all the times in my life I'd chosen to stay quiet, to let things slide for the sake of peace. This time, I hadn't, and that made all the difference. I kept hearing from people in my community, neighbors, friends, even strangers who'd heard my story. Some wanted advice, some just wanted to share their own frustrations, but all of them were looking for the same thing, reassurance that they weren't alone. I told them what I'd learned, over and over. Pay by credit card if you can. Keep every scrap of paperwork, and never be afraid to ask questions or insist on what's fair. One afternoon, my granddaughter sat with me at the kitchen table, her homework spread out between us. She looked up and asked, Grandma, do you think I'll ever have to fight for something like you did? I smiled and squeezed her hand. Maybe you will, sweetheart. But if you do, you'll know how. You'll know that you have a voice, and that you deserve to be heard. I realized then that the real legacy of this experience wasn't just a beautiful bathroom or a folder full of documents. It was the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you can stand your ground. It was the ripple effect of sharing what I'd learned, so others could do the same. So if you're listening to this, if you've ever felt powerless or overlooked, I want you to remember, you have more power than you think. Credit cards aren't just for convenience. They're your protection. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Stand your ground, trust your instincts, and don't be afraid to use your voice. If you have a story like mine, if you've ever had to fight for what's right or wish you had, I hope you'll share it. Leave a comment, send a message, or just tell a friend. The more we talk about these things, the stronger we all become. Because at the end of the day, it's not just about bathrooms or chargebacks. It's about respect. It's about dignity. It's about knowing that, no matter our age or experience, we deserve to be treated fairly. And sometimes, all it takes is one phone call, one piece of paperwork, or one determined voice to remind us of our own strength. So tell your story, stand your ground, and remember, you're never alone.